Well, great. So in the interest of time, since we are live, let's go ahead and begin. I'm going to introduce Elizabeth Stage, the director of the Lawrence Hall of Science. Elizabeth?
Well, welcome. The Lawrence Hall of Science is very pleased to have you all here and to listen and learn to the many talented people who are coming to speak today. I don't want to take any more time talking about the hall. I hope that you will appreciate the fact that our mission is to inspire and foster science learning for all, especially those who are not well served. So today we get a chance to make good on part of that. Really want to thank Ed Summers from SAS and Leonie Yurka from the North Carolina Museum of Nature and Science, who helped us get this idea going. Also, several industry supporters, Chevron, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, and Autodesk. And to all the student speakers and organizations for coming out today to help, including the California Autism Society and the UC Berkeley Disabled Students Program. Special thanks to the Smith-Kettlewell Eye Research Institute for initiating this program, funding it, and providing guidance to its execution. And also for lending us their very capable scientist, Josh Miele, who I am very pleased to introduce to you if you are not already aware of him. After having a bachelor's degree in physics and a PhD in psychoacoustics from UC Berkeley, he's been a scientist for 25 years developing innovative information accessibility solutions for blind people. And he's an inspiring and encouraging role model, and I'm sure you will enjoy his leadership in this event today. So Josh, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Elizabeth. It is really an honor to be part of this, to have helped get this event mobilized and actualized here at the Lawrence Hall of Science. So my name is Josh Miele. I'm a scientist at the Smith-Kettlewell Eye Research Institute in San Francisco, where I and a number of other scientists develop technologies that help blind and visually impaired people get access to the information they need to do the things they want to do. It's all sorts of different things. It could be for finding your way from one place to another using a map that is accessible, or an iPhone app that provides information about where you are and what's around you, or it could be a way of using scientific tools like MATLAB or R or SAS that allows blind and visually impaired scientists and engineers and students to get access to the information they need to do the research and development that they want to do. So it is my privilege to be the MC today. I get to tell you a little story here about myself. I get to introduce you to an amazing set of panelists who are all involved in science, technology, engineering, and math, and who have all dealt with a disability of some type. This event is intended to give students and others with disabilities the connections they need to the people who have paved the way before you. We want to be able to show you that you can, in fact, succeed in a STEM career, in a STEM curriculum, doing what you need to do, getting access to the information you need in order to achieve the life goals that you want. Your dreams, your aspirations. We want students with disabilities to grow up to be professionals in STEM who also have disabilities. So, it's not always easy to be a person with a disability. In fact, let's face it, it sort of begins with a diss. So very often, there are people in the world who will tell you that you can't do what you want to do because of their image of what it means for you to have the disability you have, whether it's because you're blind, whether it's because you have a mobility disability, you have a hearing disability, you have a non-visible disability like emotional or cognitive disability. There are all types of disabilities and there are all types of preconceptions to go with them. What we're here today to do is to help you succeed, to help you understand that you can do what you want to do. When I was a kid and I told a friend of the family that I wanted to be a physicist. He was a physicist. He was a professor of physical chemistry, and when I told him I wanted to be a physicist, he was very quiet. And then I found out later that he pulled my dad aside and he said, he can't be a physicist because physicists write on blackboards. And your blind son will never be able to write on a blackboard. Well, the truth is that writing on a blackboard is just one approach to being a physicist, and my parents were smart enough people to understand at every stage of the game, actually, that it was the people who would both make it possible and who would be the biggest barriers sometimes to my success. And they were always there to tell me that either they would figure out a way for me to do it, or I would figure out a way for me to do it. Self-advocacy is one of the most important aspects of being a successful person with a disability, and you have to learn to separate out the people who are letting their own misconceptions of your abilities stand in your way from the people who are giving you good advice. And it's a tough thing sometimes, but we have an amazing panel today, an amazing speaker who's going to begin with a keynote address to talk about what it's really like to be a person with a disability in a STEM field and how we address some of the attitudinal and technical barriers to doing the things we want to do, how we get access to the information we need to achieve our goals and our dreams. I'd like to introduce Ronit Chan, who is our keynote speaker today. She is a genetic counselor at the Santa Clara Valley Medical Center, and she's going to tell you a little bit about her own story and how she got to do the things how she realized her dreams of being a genetic counselor as a person with a disability. Ronit?
Sorry, we're just trying to get the slides working.
Okay, that's a picture of you and your family.
Okay, great. So if I want to advance, I do space or there. Okay. Oh, it's like down arrow. Okay, it'll go down. Okay. And the Mac is, where is it? Oh, over here. Okay. I'm shorter than you, Josh. Okay. All right, hi everybody. My name is Ronit, and as Josh said, I am a genetic counselor at Santa Clara Valley Medical Center. I am totally blind, but I do want to just say, sort of preface my whole talk by just saying that whatever I talk to you about, it is specific to me, but please just know that everything I tell you is applicable to you. So I may not be discussing disabilities in specifically your disability, but the concepts I'm going to be discussing are all applicable to everybody. So we just want to be as inclusive as possible. So I've been blind since birth, and I live with my family in Fremont. This is just a picture of me and my family because I have 2 kids, and yay for kids. So what is a genetic counselor? It is someone who, I don't counsel genes, so most people think I do, but I don't do that. But basically genetic counselors are people who educate families and patients about genetic risks to their family. there are 3 types of counseling that we do and that I do. Prenatal counseling is the first type, and that's where I talk to people who are pregnant, who may have a risk to have a child with a disability, whether that be a chromosomal abnormality such as Down syndrome, a family history of something, some kind of genetic disorder, or that we've seen something on ultrasound and we want to discuss with the parents what that means for the baby. We offer testing to know further about what is happening with the baby. We explain results, and we also refer people to resources for people who would like to have resources about what this means for their child later on. Pediatric counseling is a little bit similar. We basically evaluate children who have some kind of, who are not developing normally for whatever reason that is. It could be growth, could be developmental, lots of things. We evaluate them to see if we can figure out what they may have, whether it be genetic or something else. And we also do cancer counseling, which is basically identifying families who may have a susceptibility to breast, ovarian, colon cancer, and other types of hereditary cancers. And we talk to them about why we test for mutations, and we could potentially test other members of the family who may have a susceptibility to getting cancer. So some people who may get cancer in the future, we want to help them understand what they can do to reduce those risks. So genetic counselors work in hospitals like I do. They can work in private practice as well. Being a genetic counselor requires for you to have a master's degree. It's a 2 years master's degree after you've finished your undergrad. And then there is a requirement to become certified and licensure in California. So you have to pass a test, and then you have to obtain a license to practice. So I became interested in genetics in high school. In my biology class, there was a question in our biology book, I remember, that said, if 2 people have blue eyes, what is the chance that their child will have blue eyes? That sort of thing. I'm sure all of you have, if you've gotten that far, have seen that kind of question. And so I kind of got interested in that. And for our senior project in high school, we had to job shadow somebody in order to graduate from high school. So I found a genetic counselor to job shadow because I had read about it in my biology book and I wanted to know more about it. So I shadowed them and learned more about it. I then went to college at Scripps College in Claremont, Southern California, and I majored in human biology, which is a combination of biology and psychology, which is a really great preparatory degree for genetic counseling. I also did a lot of volunteering to get experience, so I just did a lot of volunteering with our peer counseling program in college. And then I applied to master's programs right after that, and I went to Northwestern University and got my master's in genetic counseling, and got that in 2007, at the end of 2007, and I took a year to find my first job, and so I started working in 2009 in LA. So there have been a lot of challenges along the way. Oh, and I forgot to mention, so I worked in LA for 2 years, then moved up here to the Bay Area, had my first child, and then now I'm working at San Jose. So San Jose is my second job. So there have been a lot of challenges along the way. I think determination and creativity have gotten me much further than I ever thought possible. So the first challenge that I just want to discuss a little bit is drawing a pedigree. And a pedigree is basically a visual representation of a family. There's a picture, for those who can see, there's a picture on this slide of a sample pedigree. Males are represented by squares, females are represented by circles. And there are lines that connect them together to their offspring. And it's basically a way for us to quickly look at someone's family and figure out what may be going on. So how do I draw that? Well, I didn't know. No one else really knew. But I got into school and was fortunate enough to actually meet my future husband at the time, who was a computer science guy. And he actually wrote me a program on the computer to draw pedigrees. There are actually other programs that are on the computer to draw pedigrees, but they were not accessible. So I was not able to use them with the screen reading software that I have. So he wrote me a very simple way to draw pedigrees. I put in information, it creates a PDF document of the pedigree, and I stick it in the chart. So that took a little while to sort of get that going. But it was a really big accomplishment because it was a way for me to actually do my job without help. So the next thing was evaluating feelings and counseling skills using non-visual cues. This is a really big one because everyone in school was always telling me, I just don't know how you're going to know when someone's upset. I just don't know how you're going to know if someone's crying. Well, there's a lot of ways you can know that, First of all, if they're crying, which a lot of people do cry, it tends to be audible, so you can hear it. But also, people... yes, I can't see that someone's sitting in a certain way. I can't see that they may be holding their husband's hand or whatever. I can't see those things, but I can tell how they respond to me when I ask. And so sometimes I ask questions to try to get them to talk so that I know sort of how they're responding to me and what their how their voice sounds. I can tell a lot by someone's voice, basically. And if I'm not sure, I always ask, which is a really great way to sort of build rapport with people. So the next thing is explaining visual concepts to patients. So genetics is can be really visual. For people who know, chromosomes, a lot of times it come in pictorial forms. When someone has a chromosomal abnormality, sometimes chromosomes switch around. They switch places, pieces break off. Can be complicated. So if you want to describe that to somebody, you really need to find a way to do that. So I came up with a way to do that. Instead of drawing, which most people do, I got pipe cleaners, put beads on them, have a little magnet board, and I'm able to move the pipe cleaners around the magnet board to show patients what is happening to the chromosomes. And the beads represent, genes on there. So if there's a mutation, I put like one different bead in a row of beads just to sort of make people understand that there's a mutation there, a change, basically. So that was a really, that worked out really well, actually, and I use that a lot. I also have pictures that I show, so I put Braille labels on pictures just so I know what they are, but I show pictures a lot as well. So I think the biggest challenge is actually not any of these things. It's actually convincing other people that I'm capable. And that has been the biggest challenge. It still is a challenge today, I think, for me. And it's something that I am constantly working on. As I mentioned before, it took me in school, I rotated in many different hospitals to get clinical experience before graduating. I had a lot of supervisors who were not very supportive of me and gave me a bad grade because of that. So I had to repeat one of my rotations in school because I got a bad grade, and not because I didn't do well, but because she didn't think I could do it. In finding a job, it took me a year to find my first job, and it was very hard. And the job I got was okay as a first job, but it was not an ideal situation. I was by myself in a clinic with no other genetic counselors, but I got it because someone knew me. So I got it because a genetic counselor had met me before, and she thought I could do it. She gave me a chance, and that, I think, is the biggest thing. And so I've been working, when I found my second job, same thing. I looked for over a year to find my second job here in the Bay Area. I found an amazing group of people at the hospital I'm at now who are open-minded, and I think that as I get more experience, it's become a little easier. But I think that believing in yourself and helping and getting other people to believe in you is the toughest challenge that I've had to face. And it's hard when everyone's telling you that you can't do it, and you have to kind of be the one to say, no, yes, I can. And if I don't know how to do it, I will figure it out. Especially when there's no one else. In genetic counseling, there's no other blind people in the field. So I had no one to ask. So in terms of support from other people, I was fortunate enough to find the National Federation of the Blind early on, and that's a group of people who are basically blind people who help to educate each other about blindness and capabilities of blind people. And so I was able to get involved with them, and even though I couldn't find anyone who was in genetic counseling, I did find a lot of people who are in science and math and other things like that, and tried to ask them about what they can help me do. I joined mailing lists, and I asked a lot of questions, especially from other counselors. So when I talked about the whole non-visual cues thing, I asked a lot of questions about that. How do other counselors do that? And the NFE was very supportive, even though they didn't always know. We didn't know how we were going to solve things, but we did our best. So, tips for success for you. So, like I said before, I think following your dreams is so important. If you want to do something, do it. Don't even question whether you can do it. If you don't know how to do it, find a way to do it. If you don't know how to find a way, find someone who will help you. determination and belief in yourself is so big. Find people, like I said, who are supportive of you and who will help you figure out the challenges that you're facing, and who will be supportive, and hang around with those people. I think if you don't have anyone that's in your field that has your specific disability and that's in your field, find people who are similar. So like for me, I found people who were counselors. Well, they weren't genetic counselors, but they were counselors. So I talked about the psychology part. But so find people's experiences who are similar to yours and apply their experiences to your own, even if it's in a different field. And don't be afraid to be a trailblazer. So if you're the first one to do it, well, that's great. You can help people down the road. Find other people to help you, be resourceful, think outside the box, be creative. And if you do all those things, then all the other challenges will actually just fall into place, and you'll be able to do everything that you want to do. Thanks.
Thank you so much. That was really fascinating. And everybody has a story. Everybody has a story to tell about how they got to where they are. And that's exactly what we want to do now, is give you access to as many stories as we can in the time that we have available. I'd like to invite our panel to come up and take a seat at this table here to my left while I'm sort of doing a quick intro here. I just want to sort of come back to a point that that Ronit made. Disability looks like everybody. There is no socioeconomic group of people with disabilities. There is no cultural or ethnic group of people with disabilities. We are everywhere. We are in every community. We are in every part of the world. And of course, we are in some parts of the world more than others because it has a cross-section with access to medical care and access to technology. Of course, there are some people, as Ronit knows very well, who are more predisposed to genetic disabilities than others. Of course, there's an intersection of economics with disability. Many people who have disabilities are in the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum. And that is largely not due to their disability per se, but because of their lack of access to education and employment, that we are trying to break that a little bit. And what we want is for people with disabilities to have access to the same good jobs, the same opportunities, the same education that everybody else does. And it shouldn't have to do with how much money you've got. It shouldn't have to do with who your parents are. But of course, these are realities, and we understand. We've tried to assemble a panel that can speak to you and tell stories that make sense to as many people as possible, but we don't have a panel that represents every type of person in the world or every type of person with a disability. But as Ronit said, what we can do is tell you our stories and give you the ability to ask us questions and talk to us about your particular situation, and hopefully a set of tools that will let you go forward and realize, hey, there are people out there that have been successful. That means that I can be successful too, even if you don't share any of the disabilities or other attributes of the people that we've managed to assemble today. So I'm going to ask each panelist to take just a couple of minutes each to tell us a little bit about each of us and some of the experiences that we've had as disabled students, disabled people who are trying to achieve in STEM areas. I'm going to see if this microphone works. Does this microphone? Oh, good. Okay. So who's on my left here? Okay. So why don't we'll save Ronit for the end. Is Hobie, are you?
I am. I'm all the way down at the end.
Okay, why don't we start with Hobie? So I want to introduce Hobie Wedler, who is a chemistry PhD student at UC Davis. Hobie, tell us a little bit about yourself and what your experience has been as a STEM student and a person who's blind.
Well, thank you very much. It's a true honor to be here, and I'd like to thank the Lawrence Hall of Science for inviting me. It's a really incredible event, and more need to be done like this. So as Josh said, I am a totally blind PhD candidate in computational organic chemistry up at UC Davis, and I'm a fourth-year student. And as a blind person studying something seemingly visual like organic chemistry, you need to come up with ways to make this stuff available and accessible and easy to sort of see and handle in your own way. And a lot of this for me, because in the 21st century, there haven't been many blind organic chemistry students at the graduate level. So we've had to create a lot of what we do to make chemistry accessible to me in-house. And we've had to design programs that allow, well, software essentially, that allow me to perform computational chemical research at levels equivalent to my sighted peers. And so a lot of my PhD work, the vast majority of it, I've made sure, has been actual chemistry, but a surprising amount of it has also been devoted to method development and coming up with ways to think about, okay, how could a blind person do this seemingly visual task that is strange to even think about a blind person doing? How can we make this doable? And how can we not only make it doable for me, how can we make this doable for many people to come who maybe want to study organic chemistry? So what I have in front of me here are several models of organic chemical or organic structures that we've printed out, and I'd love to tell you about these. I'll be in room 155 a little bit later on, and I'd love to tell you all about these structures and how we've implemented them to make computational chemistry accessible to me. For instance, I'm holding a structure which has two 6-membered rings that I was able to build using a software that we wrote in collaboration with some great folks in the Netherlands, and I can basically imagine a structure in my mind, feel it in my hands, grab any particular bond on the structure. Once it's printed out, I ran calculations on this and tell you that it's 155 picometers long just by reading the braille that we've calibrated.
I want to just interrupt for a second. I want to ask you about some of the educational and outreach work you do. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. So I'm always really excited to get other blind and visually impaired and really students with any disabilities excited about science and excited about just doing whatever you want to do and reaching for the stars. So I founded a nonprofit back in 2012 called Accessible Science, and our mission statement is just that. We really seek to expose anyone and everyone who is a minority considered a minority in the sciences to the sciences and really make science come to life for them. So our biggest event are chemistry camps. We hold annual chemistry camps every year that happen the first weekend of May in collaboration. 10 to 15 blind and visually impaired high school students from really around the world together to learn from each other and from blind and sighted instructors, and perhaps most importantly from blind mentors and role models, that it's okay to be blind, and it's okay to be blind and want to do chemistry or whatever visual field these students may want to pursue. So we have a great time bringing these fields, this organic chemistry to life through hands-on experiments that the students actually perform completely independently. So they synthesize esters, which are organic compounds that have a strong smell, and instead of using eyesight or a color change to see when the reaction is completed, they use their sense of smell. They also perform titrations, and a lot of you may have done things where you add acids to bases. That's a titration, and when we do those sorts of experiments, we're so used to using indicators that change color. In the chemistry lab up at Enchanted Hills, we use indicators that change smell. So onion and garlic actually lose their smell in basic solution and come back to being very strongly smelling when they're in acidic or normal pH solution. And I just want to say one more thing about, just as a message to you guys, and one thing that I really want you to do. Like all of the people on this panel, I imagine, I've had wonderful parents who have been so supportive. And that's really what has driven me to work really hard, is my parents and the people around me, the great role models around me, holding high expectations and really never lowering the bar. So I was able to maintain that attitude into my studies. And also, you have to be responsible for your own doing. So every action you take is what you want to do, and you can't have other people doing a lot of things for you, because then if you do that, it's them who gets the pleasure of being successful, or them who gets blamed if there's a failure. It's so much fun to take things into your own hands and be responsible and take responsibility for everything you do. And that's what I just love about being a blind student, is being able to take responsibility for what happens to me in the chemistry lab. And you just network and get involved, meet other people. The more people you meet, the more exposure you get, and the more success you may have. So get out there and network, work hard, and love life.
Thank you, Hobie. Thank you so much. You know, I want to go next to Akila, and is your last name pronounced Raju? Raju? Is your mic on?
Hello?
Okay,
Yeah.
there you go. So Akila is a third-year computer science student at UC Berkeley, and you know, many disabilities are visible and many disabilities are not visible. And Akila, I know that your disability is not visible, and that presents unique challenges. Can you tell us a little bit about your studies and what you do as a student at UC Berkeley, and a little bit about how you've learned about and come to your understanding your disability and how that affects you as a student in computer science?
So I'm a third-year computer science major, and I was actually diagnosed with my disability in August of last year. And my disability is chronic depressive disorder.
Just a little closer to your mic.
Oh, chronic depressive disorder, which means that for most days I have depression, and if it goes away, it doesn't go away for more than 2 months. It was really challenging to find out, like in the middle or at the beginning of my junior year, that I had a disorder. But looking back, I think I've had it for most of my life. I just wasn't aware until August. And I think it was because I had very little knowledge of mental health, and there's really no awareness of mental health, especially at Cal, unfortunately. Sorry, what was that?
Can you tell us a little bit about your studies and how having understood more about your disabilities, how that's maybe improved or impacted your ability to be effective as a student?
Oh, thank you. So I started computer science my freshman year, and I'm still continuing through the prerequisites. I took a break when I found out that I have a disability. And originally, I had a lot of trouble with my classes, and I noticed I had more trouble than my peers. I would spend a lot of time working and studying, but then I wouldn't get the grades that I wanted, even though I put in the same amount of effort and work as my classmates. And I always wondered why, like why wasn't I doing as well as my peers? Like what was going wrong? Because I was putting in the work. And then I would have really bad anxiety attacks and depression that would last for months, and I wasn't aware of what it was. But once I became diagnosed, it was like, it changed my life, because I was finally, I always thought something was wrong with me, but then I realized that I have a disability. I don't have something wrong with me, I'm just different. And there's nothing wrong with that. It gave me, being diagnosed gave me a lot of clarity and a lot of understanding of myself and how I work, which I'm really thankful for. And I almost withdrew last semester, actually, just to take a break and work on my mental health, but I decided to stay. And I took a grad course, and I also took an upper division computer science course. I did 2 research projects. I think I might have done something. I'm also in a sorority. I balanced a lot of extracurriculars because I had a very strong will, because you know what, like, I'm gonna do what I wanna do, and nothing's gonna stop me. I mean, I I may have to take more time to work on the things that I'm passionate about, but that's okay because I'm passionate about it and I want to do it. And
Didn't you start an on-campus group to promote science and technology tell me what I'm trying to get at here.
so I started this semester, I started this organization called Tequity, which is kind of like, like tech equity. It's a play on tech equity, yeah. And the purpose of our organization is to promote minority inclusion in tech because the current community on campus at Cal is just not really inclusive towards minorities, whether it be students who are disabled or students of color or sexual orientation minorities. And so we're trying to create a community that is more inclusive on campus and allow and encourage people, encourage minorities to be more involved in tech. It's been really challenging, but it's been a really fun process. And like I already see, like even through just one semester, a lot of people are very excited about what it's going to bring. So I'm really happy for that.
Thank you so much. I just want to point out that one of the things that you mentioned is something that I think is something that doesn't get enough acknowledgement, is that being a person with a disability, being a student with a disability, it's a lot of work. There are a lot of extra things that you have to do as a result of your disability, whether it's getting access to information or managing your health or other aspects. It's part of being a person with a disability is sort of acknowledging, yes, I do have this extra work that other people don't have. And I think just often it's important to just remember that is a factor in your life, and to not beat yourself up about your lack of any difficulties you may have, because you're really juggling a lot of work. You're juggling 2 jobs at least. So I just want to recognize what you were saying there, and thank you very much for sharing your story with us. Is Brian here? Did Brian make it? Okay. So let's see. I have a list of, is Ronit? Yeah. Do we have any other panelists besides Ronit that I haven't talked to yet? So, did Alex come? No, Alex, I think got unfortunately into a car accident on the way here. So we wish him well. So we also have questions. Did you collect questions? So what I'd like to do is just tell a quick. Actually, yeah. Let's open it up to questions, and then if there are other students here that want to share a quick story, then that would be really great. And remember that the next part of this event is going to let attendees and presenters all sort of mingle and look at the awesome facilities here at Lawrence Hall of Science. And so we'll get a chance to do some one-on-one also. But let's go to questions. Sherry, do you have those questions written down?
We're going to take questions from the audience. So
Okay.
if you raise your hand, we'll bring a microphone over.
Or otherwise, you don't have to raise your hand if that's, an issue. Just okay.
On the ground, and we'd love to take any questions from the audience if you have specific questions, and we will bring a microphone over to you.
And while we're, are we getting questions? Because Ronit, I think probably has
Thank you.
If you could please state
Hello?
your name,
There you
and
go.
then where you're from, and then your question.
Is the
Can
mic
you hear
on?
it? Can you hear it?
There you go.
go. I'm Sandy Erdos, and I'm a director of a preschool in Oakland. And we're an inclusion class, and they're not around very much. And my question is, because I've been kind of dealing with this for the last 9 years on my own, and usually have at least 3 students included with our typical children every year. And the biggest problem that I have when I first get the little guys, because we're 3 to 6 years old, is giving the information to the parents of where to go and to get some information to help them. And if there's an organization or if there's something that I can give them the information to try to figure out where to go. I get several calls, and they're all wanting to know, where can I take my little one to get some extra help besides the school districts?
You know, there are all sorts of organizations in the Bay Area and in the world that specialize in support for people with disabilities. Some are across disabilities, some are specific to a particular disability, and one of the most awesome resources actually is a thing right here in Berkeley. The Ed Roberts campus is a place near, it's on Adeline Street, and it has 8 or 9 different disability-related organizations. The World Institute for Disability, which does disability policy on an international level. The Bay Area Outreach and Recreation Program, which does disability sports and fitness. Through the Looking Glass, which does early childhood development for kids with disabilities. The Disability Rights and Education Fund, Defense Fund, a legal group who does disability advocacy and litigation. There are, and more. So that's one of the best places, I think, to start looking for information is the Ed Roberts campus. Berkeley and the Bay Area are an amazing place for disability awareness and activism, and really your resources and help for any specific question you might have, I think, are just a Google and a BART ride away. Go ahead, Hobie.
I wanted to just add something. I'm Ellen. I'm the Early Childhood Coordinator at Lawrence Hall of Science, and I know that First 5 Alameda County is a great resource to direct parents to. They have a service called Help Me Grow, and it's supposed to be kind of a one-stop call that parents can make if they have any concerns about their child's development or are looking for resources for 0 through 5-year-olds. So I'd suggest First 5 Alameda County, Help Me Grow.
Okay, I think we have another question over here, a student in this row, is that
Okay.
correct? Yeah. Okay, let me bring the mic over. Hold on.
Yeah,
It's fine, it's no problem.
We're going to move on to the next question, I think.
Okay. Hello, my name is Mohammed Hussein. I'm from the Hatland Center for the Blind in San Pablo. And then my question? Is it all right if it's like a personal question about just about disability, with the mainstream students, how is it to be included with them?
That's a great question. Hobie, you wanna talk
Sure,
about
yeah.
mainstreaming and inclusion?
You know, it's a really good question you ask, and first of all, I think it's great that you're at the Hatland Center receiving training. That's a huge accomplishment already.
Talk slowly.
What it means to get full inclusion and be in the classroom with a lot of other students is that you sort of have an obligation to show the instructor and to show your classmates kind of what you can do. So at the same time as being a student in a full inclusion situation, you're also somewhat of a teacher explaining what you can and can't do. So I think the most important part of being fully included is what Josh touched on earlier, which is being a good self-advocate and being able to explain what you feel is most important for you. Because just like the preschool teacher who asked the question, you know, there's so many types of disabilities and so many things in the full inclusion and non-disabilities, for that matter, in the full inclusion sector. It's very important for you to sort of be the expert in your field if you can. And also, I think it's important in a full inclusion classroom that you make yourself available to other students to, really explain how you do things differently, and also so that you can kind of work with everyone around you to make sure that you have the most efficient work method and work technique possible related to those other students.
So it's really interesting, isn't it, that one of the most important skills doesn't have anything to do with science or math or getting information out of a book. One of the most important skills that students with disabilities really need to master is the ability to speak up. And not everybody is comfortable with that. Obviously, people like me and Hobie speak up a lot, but it's not everybody is comfortable doing it, and it's one of the things that you really need to master if you're going to be a successful person with a disability, is letting people know what type of access accommodations you're going to need, and knowing it yourself. I wanted to just check in with Ronit and see if she wanted to answer.
I don't want to take up any time. It's okay.
Okay.
Could I actually add on to that?
Hi, my name's Laura, and I live in Albany, and I work in Silicon Valley at a tech company. I'm here with my son, who has a disability, and my question was about, I'm so inspired hearing your stories of innovation. It sounds like by your, I've heard several things here that sound like you've inspired other people working with you to come up together to come up with new ways of thinking and seeing things. And I'm just curious if any of these have crossed over into mainstream or become, it sounds like things that we can use beyond the disability, that it's applicable to all people and all other people in the workplace and in schools.
Actually, Sherry, do you want to talk a little bit about that, or
Representative from Microsoft, I wonder if I could put him on the spot to talk about
how does
innovation.
I think
Would that be all right?
what she's asking about is universal design and the transition of a thing that is a disability-related technology and it becoming useful for everybody. The curb ramp is the poster child for universal design and something that's developed for people with disabilities and but is useful for everybody. So, Gus, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure.
There you are.
Thank you. I'm Agustia Mehta from Microsoft. I'm an engineering manager on the HoloLens team, which is our augmented reality holographic display we're working on. It's a really great question, and I think Dr. Miele put it excellently in that universal design benefits everyone. I really like the term universal design much more so than accessibility. To talk to one of my competitors' projects, which I used to work on, so I don't feel too bad mentioning it. I think VoiceOver on iOS is a great example of that, in that I know a number of sighted people who use it to read things and books aloud, but it also makes the phone accessible to blind people. I definitely agree that there's a long way to go for all of us in the tech industry to make that better, but it's something we all are striving for. And I guess for those of you in the room who are going to potentially be going to careers in tech, which is many of you, I guess the message I'd give and what I'm trying to imbue in my own career is to bring the concept of universal design in everything you do, even if it's not your own job role.
I think that's great. I just to give you a couple of other examples of where disability-related technologies have sort of made the jump to the big time, the mainstream. Dictation was for a very long time a technology, computer dictation, speech to text, if you will, was for a very long time a technology that was only used by people who could not type. And now everybody's using it. Everybody is dictating texts and using Siri and other technologies to dial their phones and to take notes and to send email messages. And it is completely, I mean, I hear people doing it on BART and on the street all the time. And that's pretty mainstream.
Your hand up?
Yeah. Other questions?
So,
We have one more question?
Yeah.
Hobie, do you want to go ahead and make a comment, and then we have one
I just
question?
wanted to make a quick comment about universal design and how some of the work that we're doing up at Davis is very related. So these 3D models that you see on the table in front of me are used for basically me. At first, the reason we created the software was for me to be able to understand what was happening in my chemical structures as we performed calculations. And what we realized is that we were printing out some very intricate structures that several people in our research group who are sighted really didn't envision looking the way they were when they were printed three-dimensionally. So this tool absolutely helps sighted chemical researchers just as much as it helps the blind. And it's kind of one of those fun things that you realize after the fact, wow, this really is universal and can help everyone.
So I think I want to take maybe one or two more questions.
Josh, we have time for one more question.
One more question.
And then I'll introduce the other students. Here we go.
Hi, thank you. My name is Sarah, and I wanted to ask a question that I ask myself. So I'm legally blind and just starting off my educational career, and for the first time in my life, really feeling the weight of my disability. My dream is a career in STEM, but something I ask myself on an almost daily basis is it worth it? I find myself constantly... Okay, sorry. Yeah. Okay. Needing to prove my capability to my peers and my instructors and to myself. And I wanted to ask you, now that you've made it or are in the process of doing so, is it worth it? It's your dream, and you should follow your dreams. I'm not doubting that at all. Your stories are very inspirational, and I just wanted to get your perspective.
Can I address that?
Yes.
Okay. So the simple answer is yes. But I'm just going to go on and say, I think you have to think about what it is that you want to do. What is it about it that is drawing you to the field? So whatever it is that you may want to do, I think in order to keep going and in order to not get discouraged, you have to keep reminding yourself what it is about that field that you like the best. That sounds kind of silly, I know, but that's what I always did because yeah, it gets really, really hard. It does. I'm not going to lie. Like, there are many times in school while looking for a job, many times where I would say, I'm just, what's the point? Why am I doing this? If no one thinks I can do it, then, not to say that they're right, but is it really worth my extra time and effort to do it? But I'm telling you that when you get to the end of it, when you get to what you want to do, it is so sweet, and it makes you feel so good. And then you can actually go back and help other people, which is what I'm trying to do. I think that there's not really an easy answer to your question, but I think that I think that you need to keep in mind what it is that you like about the field that you're interested in. So, you said STEM. So whatever it is that you're interested in, I think that you just need to keep that in mind, and just also know that there will be hard days. You will meet people who will not be supportive. That is just a reality of what it is, And maybe for some people, maybe they try it, maybe they decide, I want to do this, but I actually have other interests too. So maybe they decide to go into something else, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think that. But if that's really what you want to do, if that really is the case, then yes, it is going to be a lot of work. It's going to be hard, but when you make it, it's going to be great.
I completely second that. I also struggled with that problem of well, if I have to spend a lot more time than all of my other students or all of my other peers, is it worth it? If I don't think I'm smart enough or good enough for my major or my career. But I really looked into why I liked computer science and like why I wanted to do it. And then I realized like it's worth it. It's gonna be hard, and it has been really hard. But the whole journey, I learned a lot more about myself and what I'm really capable of. And it's amazing like how much you can accomplish if you just like really believe you can do it no matter what other people say. And being persistent, I've like definitely probably bothered a few of my professors, but you know what? I don't care because it's what I want to do, and nothing's gonna stop me from doing what I want to do. And some people, like other students, may not understand, but all that matters is that you know yourself and you know what you want to do. That's all that matters.
And I think it always helps to have a community that you can talk to about it. So this Berkeley and the Bay Area, as I mentioned, are a Disneyland of disability. There are a lot of resources and a lot of very accomplished people who can share their stories and advice with you. And I think that it's always important to remember to ask yourself, how can I do what I want to do, as opposed to thinking about how impossible it's going to be. Figure out what it is that will make it possible for you to achieve your dreams. And I want to also say, people change their minds. People do develop different dreams while they're on their way to their first one. And if you are in the middle of getting a biology degree and you realize in the middle of that what you really want to do is be a filmmaker, and you decide that you want to switch careers, that's one thing. That's chasing your dreams. That's, I think, something that's reasonable to do. If you realize in the middle of it, wow, this is hard, I think I'm not going to be able to do it. The question is, what can I change? What can I do that will help me actually realize my dream, as opposed to accepting defeat? So I think that what I'd like to finish on here is a note of saying what an amazing set of people we've brought together here today. And this is just a small sample of the kinds of stories and experiences that the disabled community has to offer in science and technology, and in any field you care to look in. We have people with disabilities who are successes and who are at the top of their field, working and studying right here around you. And all you need to do is start looking for them and thinking about how you can connect with their experience in order to build the dream that you want to realize. So I want to thank Sherry. The next thing we're going to do is introduce our student panelists. Is that right?
Yes. Excuse me. What I'd like to do is we have a number of people, Berkeley students, as well as organizations here. I'd like to pass the mic around and have them introduce themselves briefly. And they are going to be in different rooms, and you can talk with them one-on-one. But I want to make sure that you know who they are very quickly as I pass the mic around. Before we do that,
I just want to once again say thank you to our panelists here. I want to say thank you to Alex and Brian, even though they couldn't make it, they tried. And I want to say thank you to the Smith-Kettlewell Eye Research Institute for providing leadership and funding through the Rehabilitation Engineering Research Center for Low Vision and Blindness. I want to thank the Lawrence Hall of Science for doing all of the incredible work and amazing logistics behind putting this event together. And I want to thank the audience for joining us and being part of this event today. Thank you all.
Okay, well, wonderful. So I'm gonna maybe I'll just start on this side of the room, and then we'll like move over to that side of the room.